We are excited now to open up this conversation. Also, want to give a shout out to our audience members. I see we have people registered from all over, including Salmon Arm, Edmonton, Selkirk, Ottawa, and Kitchener. And this is very meta, but we encourage you all joining us from home to share your experience on social media. Take a picture of how you're watching us and joining us. Feel free to share moments, quotes from this. You can use the hashtag Walrus Talks and tag us at the Walrus. If you have a question for this discussion part of this evening, please submit it via chat. You can do it in Zoom or in the Facebook Live comments. I now invite our talkers to turn on their cameras and join us for the Q&A session. Now, while we already have audience questions coming in, I also have some questions to kick us off. And Serene, we'll get you back on screen because I have one for you there. Okay, excellent. Well, Serene, I first discovered your work actually on social media. And as you mentioned, Indigenous creators are doing incredible things across the platforms from Facebook to Twitter to TikTok. And as you mentioned, really reconnecting the oral traditions. So I'd love to hear more from you on, well, we're talking about the future of the internet. How is new technology actually taking us back and connecting us to history? It can be dance, it can be drums, but a lot of it's coming alive in new ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so many of us have been tuned in during the pandemic, even to the rise of Indigenous TikTok users. And there's been this real insurgence and resurgence of Indigenous narratives taking up these digital spaces. And I think it's really interesting because it's happening in a way that was surprising to me. Instead of sort of shaping into the normal fads that were happening and making them Indigenous people actually started to reclaim and restructure and share their culture through these ways. So I think a lot of people forget that just reading a book, just having to write an email, all of these things that force us to be from left to right. We don't realize that even reading is left to right, and it goes outside of a circular framework that is Indigenous. So all of these ways are colonized forms of connecting. And so social media, just the art of being able to connect like this, talking, all of a sudden allows Indigenous people to operate in a way that we haven't had the opportunity to in this like larger framework. So for me, I know that I work with a lot of young people, and just having the ability to speak instead of write something down has changed the way that we are connecting and the way that we're able to pick up and share our stories. So
and I love the mix of the generations too, right? You also see that there's this assumption that new technology is just for young people, but that's actually not what we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been survival mechanism for so many elders during the pandemic to connect.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Speaking of bridging divides, online engagement has the ability to connect us beyond our hometowns. And I'm curious how this shift to a global community creates new space for human rights, for power imbalances. There is this idea that the world is watching. Ronald, I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Sure. One of the things that's been very important through the social media platforms has been people connecting around justice issues. The idea of being able to form a community with people who are, everybody's scattered. We're all moving in different places for work and so on. But to create a community around and an identity around a justice cause has been very important for a lot of people everywhere around the world. One of the people that I worked with were the Herero and Nama, who were claiming compensation and recognition for a genocide that took place in German Southwest Africa in 1904 to 1908. So their claims were directed toward the government of Namibia and the government of Germany, with expatriate communities scattered throughout. And that would not have been possible. That kind of linkage across hemispheres would have been impossible in earlier times.
Thank you. It's also been interesting because new technology and specifically online platforms have opened up new spaces where people can participate either anonymously or with their name and photo attached. And I'd love to explore with you all the benefits of either approach in terms of how it advances equity. Sandra, can we start with you, especially because on Wikipedia, you can be completely anonymous. You can have a profile that's a nickname, or you could have the name that you go by and use for professional purposes. What have you seen in terms of the edits and what people choose to use?
Thanks for the question. I remember when I created my my profile in Wikipedia, I did mull that over. Did I want people to know that they were made by me and be able to trace me back to my real person, or did I want sort of an identity in doing that? And I think it's a personal choice. I'm traceable. You can see the edits that I make. Some of my colleagues did go for sort of something a little bit less clear, but I really feel like if you're going to be a part of a change, you have to stand behind what you say. But I will say the caveat is that it's a space that I somewhat felt safe in, but not everyone will feel safe. And so personal safety probably dictates that. And I did have some colleagues who definitely didn't want to be out there as themselves, because there are people who would call you out for things, and it gets quite tiring to have to explain what you're doing. I think a Wikipedia edit is pretty easy because the Wikipedia community is pretty much about changing it up, and pages change all the time. But I can see for other online platforms, there are some concerns. And when I talk to some of my male colleagues, so I know I have a bit of I focus more on the gender differences, but I think women think about this a little bit more than men, or people who are marginalized might worry about it more than people who have privilege. And so, that is a really good question. The community is self-policing, which means that sometimes it polices itself well and sometimes it fails.
Thank you, Brianna. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because the power of an online petition is the names, right? Especially journalists who people follow. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Sandra had to say. I think when it comes to choosing which kind of platform you want to be able to share your message on, it's really key to include how you're going to illustrate that. So for us, with our petition, we used change.org, which was a petition platform that was being used quite frequently during last summer. I know there was kind of a huge general one that obviously got millions of signatures to support George Floyd's family. And then after that, there was a series of other petitions that I saw going around just in our own local community within like Toronto media for other Black people that were unfortunately killed at the hands of police. And so choosing that platform, I think, was a smart idea, because even when people see the logo that's associated with the platform, depending on how it's related to the time and when it's being shared, they're more likely to click on it and actually engage with it. And I know for us, including a title that was something that would bring people in, bring alumni in, bring current students in, bring journalists of any kind in, was what we were focused on. So yeah, I think when it comes to the platforms, it's really key to understand how you're going to communicate it in a way that's for the right audience as well.
Thank you for that. We're definitely seeing the internet as a powerful tool for storytelling, and people can share their own stories through a post, through a blog, through a video. But then there's the opportunity for collectively shaping a narrative. And I think Me Too is a really good example of that. Would love to hear your thoughts on what is the power or potential of a single story on social. Serene, I'll throw it over to you. Your job as a journalist and as a storyteller is to collect stories and share them. I can only imagine some of the individual stories that you've reported on, but also come across in your work.
Yeah. Stories connect us. Stories inherently inform how we see each other and how we are allowed to, if I can even say this, walk with each other. I think that sometimes people say walk in their shoes, and I think that that's a very privileged thing to say, even because it means that you could somehow walk in a place where you couldn't. So you can walk next to someone and feel and be in conversation and relate, but you can never experience in quite that same way. So I think one story that connects you, makes you see the humanity in something, can change even the most stubborn, solid views and open a mind or a heart. And I think that the job of the journalist is to understand what story and what angle and how you're going to take that ember you've been given, and how you're going to let it be a spark that creates a wildfire that people have to notice and have to address. And so I think it is not just the power of one story, but it is also the responsibility of the storyteller to be wise and curious and to be willing to really to ethically express that story. And I think that that's what's so important here, is that you could have the best story, but if you're not the right storyteller, then you have to know when to hand that story off. And I think for me, that's been the biggest work, is so many people come to me with amazing stories, and the first question I have to ask is, but why should you tell that story? And how can you affect change if it's you who tells that story? And it might be the biggest breaking story of your career, but is it your story to tell? And so for me, it's both the power and potential of a storyteller to know when they could create this really important moment, or when they could also see that harm they could cause and pass that along. And it's a difficult one, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of responsibility there. I want to invite Sandra in because I see you nodding along. And I also think with Wikipedia, there's the storyteller who are the editors as a community, but also the stories that you're trying to tell. So what are your thoughts, Sandra?
So the interesting thing about Wikipedia, as I'm listening to Serene, is that you're not supposed to tell your own story in Wikipedia. That's frowned upon. And yet there are stories that I know of a researcher who told me that her own page is not as plentiful and doesn't capture a lot, and not out of a source of ego, but just accuracy. She can't change her own page, but I could. And so, most of the time, the pages that are edited aren't with that intrinsic permission or that connection. You edit a stranger's page, and it's a little bit of a cold platform in that you're not telling a personal story. It's all evidence-based, right? You write a line, that sentence needs to be supported by some other documentation, and you cannot improve a page unless there's a lot of good publication around the statement that you're trying to add. And so it really is depending on whether someone has published, their work is well known, is recognized, is elsewhere online. And so there's a little bit of a gatekeeper action there, where there's stories that I would love to tell, but maybe I don't know about them, or maybe I can't support them, and so they're not going to be accepted. And the gatekeepers tend to be people who aren't necessarily as diverse as the community that Wikipedia should serve. It should reflect the community that it serves. So Wikipedians, editors, should be as diverse as the people who use it.
Thank you for that. Ronald, I want to come back to the research that you've done. Everyone has touched on how social media is being used to organize and to rally around a cause. In your research, have you found that social media is a place where people are discovering and learning about issues, or is it where people who have already kind of decided where they are on an issue are looking to find more information to either confirm their beliefs or finding people who agree with them?
Well, I think pretty clearly it's both. When I first started looking at media and justice activism, it was in the 90s during what I call the netizen period, with the international movement of Indigenous peoples in the United Nations. And for a lot of the Indigenous delegates who came to the meetings of the Working Group on Indigenous Peoples and the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues later on, it was an epiphany to make connections and to discover other Indigenous peoples, and they would then follow up online, exploring and connecting with constituents back home. And so there's more talking going on globally inside the meeting room through the media that people are connecting with each other through than actually the dialogue in the room itself. So people, once making a discovery, are then wanting to explore more, and they're forming common cause in community through those explorations.
And Brianne, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. How many people were on board right away? Like, give me the petition, I'm good. And where did you have to take some time in terms of persuading people or educating people to come on board?
Yeah, you know, relatively a lot of people were pretty interested in signing it. And I think that's just because of the whole Ryerson connection. There's so many great journalists who have graduated from Ryerson, also other schools. But you know, within that community, there was a lot of mutual connections that people were able to share with their friends, their colleagues within their own newsrooms. And for the most part, a lot of people were very keen on being a part of it and supporting it. There was a goal that we had for signatures, I believe, the second day after we initially posted the petition. And we said we wanted to reach 5,000. And with how much it grew the night before, we were pretty excited to see whether we were going to make that number. But one thing that we all actually made sure to do was to actually reach out to those journalists who have the impact and who have the audience to share on their own platforms, because in that way, you know, the people that do follow them and kind of look up to them for their knowledge and what they have to share relative to news and society in Toronto, you know, it would have been able to reach a lot more people in that way. So, you know, we just went on a kind of like a DM rush and just direct messaged, you know, a lot of the popular news broadcast anchors on every platform, including LinkedIn, and just made sure that they were knowing that, hey, we're here, we're present, this is what we care about, and we would love it if you supported something like this to reshare. So it was really awesome to see, you know, well-known journalists actually quote tweeting our petition and saying, I feel like I would be better at my job if I took a course like this, or, you know, this is something that's really important that I wish I had available to me when I was in school. It would have helped me with X or ABC. So that was really great to see in that way.
And it also highlights the ecosystem that exists not within just journalism, but also online in terms of influencers, traditional media, new media, etc. All right, I want to get to audience questions. Lorraine, thank you for your questions. Lorraine asks, how do you adjust the conversation knowing many who want to be a part of it are not conversant with the platform? So in terms of digital divide or access, curious, Sandra, if we could start with you. You know, did you have anyone in the community who said, I'm scared, I don't know how to do this, you know, because some people might feel very comfortable coming in to edit Wikipedia. Maybe they've tried it before, they're fast on their keyboards, where the concept might be completely new to someone who wants to learn.
Yeah, a good question. With edit-a-thons, we tried to tell people what to expect by making it clear you had no requirement of any experience, and we could take you, we encourage you to create your account ahead of time, but even if you arrive never having done that, by within a couple of hours, we could have you being active and being productive and feeling like you were already making edits. The thing I don't know is that whether people who were interested and didn't sign up to come, there are probably some who are daunted by the idea. It does probably feel a little strange to be participating and putting yourself out there. And if you've never been a part of like a community created platform like Wikipedia, that probably is a little scary. There are some technological divides. And of course, our last one was done virtually. So you did need a good internet connection. And while most of us take that for granted, there are lots of people who don't have access to that kind of internet connection or to a device. So we did provide devices for anyone who couldn't come with their own. We had a great network. People could come into the Ingenium Center when we offered our in-person ones. And like I said, people who signed up were probably a self-selected group, people who are prepared to do it. But I would encourage anyone who hears me talking about an editathon, if you see anyone else hosting them, because they're not only done by us, don't hesitate to dip your toe in that pond. They can be lots of fun. And even if you only contribute a sentence, it's still a sentence.
Ronald, you study this around the world where there are some pretty big barriers to technology. Curious what you've seen in terms of bringing more people into this work, maybe people who don't have access or even know where to start.
Right. So in the community of the international movement of Indigenous peoples, this is a big thing, because to even register as an Indigenous participant in a UN meeting, you have to have NGO status and you have to have an internet connection. And a lot of Indigenous peoples are, define themselves and are defined by their marginality and their political structure, which is not an NGO structure, and it isn't a technology that they're familiar with. So there's a big technological divide in the movement of Indigenous peoples worldwide. Now, in the online investigators that I looked at, that's a different kind of divide, because the analysts are people who are supremely competent, innovators, hackers, people who've done gaming. So there's a divide between witnesses and analysts in that community. The witnesses are the ones who've have the cameras, and the analysts are the ones who are looking at metadata and doing geolocation and figuring it all out and seeing how it works as evidence. So everywhere you look in the human rights community, no matter where, there's an important divide between the different levels of technological sophistication, access, and ability to navigate.
Thank you, Ronald. Serene, I'd love to hear what you found in your work as well as seen in your own community.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting conversation because I think it's multifaceted in a lot of ways. I think missing from here, I think, is also the question of desire. Do Indigenous communities want to connect, want to be seen online, want to use online platforms as tools for preservation, and should we be? The other thing is about track record. So Indigenous people don't have a really great track record of working with historians, anthropologists, data collectors, and having our stories be recorded in a meaningful way. Also, our ceremonies, because so many of our things that make us who we are have always been recorded from the outside looking in. Things that are sacred, like our ceremonies, our gatherings, have been recorded wrongly, have been recorded as, as things that they're not. And so our drums, our songs, our scrolls are still locked up in museums, and we don't even have access to them. So I was raised in a very traditional way, and there is a huge conversation happening between elders and young people right now about what belongs online. And yes, our stories can be preserved in this really important way because there are elders who are losing. But if we record them, do we forget to listen? Do we forget how important it is to remember and to trust that we can pass those on? So for me, this is a very interesting conversation, and I'm right in the middle of it so often. I'm strictly forbidden from talking about certain things or sharing songs or stories online, and that's very important to my family. And the other side of me is all online. So I think the real important thing here is about sovereignty, and Indigenous people have the right to a sovereign voice, whether it's online or in person. And I think that's the conversation here.
Yeah, and a reminder of the importance of consent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. when it's online, even though it seems like everyone has their cameras out, right? That's still part of the conversation. All right, a few more audience questions. Brianna, this one's for you. How can a course like yours be adapted to different faculties? Faculty of music, faculty of arts. Any advice for people who are hearing this story going, how can we, bring it to other departments?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The first thing that comes to my mind in terms of taking outside of the journalism world and maybe into other faculties is I think that it starts with the curriculum that's actually being developed and who's developing that for students to learn, right? Because I think it kind of goes from a pipeline. There's a group of people that create the curriculum, the teachers teach the curriculum, the students learn it, right? So I think being mindful of what's actually being studied, just recalling on my own personal experiences. I did a few music classes, and most of the musicians that we learned about were Beethoven or other classical musicians of that sort. It would be interesting to take more of an inclusive perspective on music or the arts. And I know in arts programs and universities, you learn about philosophy, take some philosophy courses, learning about Black philosophers and what they had to bring to that area of focus and what they had to say about that conversation. In terms of music, studying artists or people that were revolutionary within the Black community and being inclusive in that way, I think is a way to bring it out to other courses. Because that way I feel like students in the class can have a sense of connection to what they're actually learning about. I know for myself, I felt pretty disconnected in school only because I wasn't actually seeing people that we were studying and learning and looking up to that looked like me or that looked like my family. And if I did have the opportunity to have that, I think it would help me as a student and probably other students to see themselves in what they're learning about, right? And see that like, hey, this person that comes from my community contributed this to the study of music. And that's something to be proud of, I think.
Thank you so much. We have a question for Sarain from Kasha. I'm curious, have you found that social media is more useful, better suited to speaking with other Indigenous peoples, perhaps making new connection and sharing, or has it opened up better or improved avenues to share your stories with non-Indigenous audiences?
Yeah, great question. I think that the answer is both. I think for so many Indigenous people, it's become a tool to see. I hate the word struggle or issue. To see our experiences and identify with each other's experiences, but also, I mean, I grew up thinking that everybody knew about the atrocities that the Canadian government had done to Indigenous people. I grew up thinking that everyone knew about residential school because how could they not? I grew up thinking that had to be the truth because we grew up learning about the Holocaust in school. So of course I thought that everybody knew all of these things. And we know that the truth is that in Canada, we don't. We still do not know. We don't teach in school properly. We're not talking and speaking truth. So I think that it's really important for us to be able to speak truth in that way and to reclaim narratives and to actually retell history. So I think it's been an incredible tool to correct history in that way.
Thank you. Well, as we're about to wrap up, I have one final question, and I'd love a short answer from each of you on this. Are there any online tools or initiatives, organizations that you're excited about right now? Ronald, want to kick us off? I'm sure you're tracking a lot of things.
Oh, I am a lot. I'm actually very keen about the organization Bellingcat, which has done a lot of interesting journalism and investigation, and also Syrian Archive, which is I mentioned in my presentation. That's doing important work, and I'm working on this now, trying to learn more.
Thank you. Sandra.
I know of so many organizations, and what they have in common is that they feel empowered by some of the tools available to them. So many of the women in STEM are working together to tell better stories of women in STEM, and sort of that notion of When the elevator brings you up, you send it back down to bring others to where you are. So there's a lot of organizations that help. Happy to point out, I probably know of a dozen, so I couldn't name just one.
And there's also a lot of open source approach to these ideas of doing things and saying you can replicate it, just like you said with the editathons, right? That someone started that and lots of organizations are doing them now.
You're right, absolutely.
Thank you. Brianna.
Yeah, one organization that comes to mind, Vaccine Hunters Canada. They've been really popular within the media right now, and they're just a group of people that work 9 to 5, but then they dedicate their outside time to disseminating information on where people are able to get vaccines. I think just to speak to that point in general, it's really great to look at organizations like them and see how they were able to unite and come together and put out information that's useful to those who choose to have the vaccine. And I think, you know, I even read somewhere yesterday that they're meeting with the Prime Minister today. And this is like a group of volunteers that started like very grassroots, and they've kind of built up this reputation, at least in my circles, to help people get to where they need to, you know, help elderly people. The way that they even like type their tweets, it's like very easy for anybody to read and like communicate to them like, okay, I have a clinic in my neighborhood today from this and this time. You know, if it wasn't for them, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to book mine. So it's just very cool to see organizations like that and how they can use a platform to get their message out.
Thank you. And last minute to Thrain.
Awesome. So I think on that note, I'm thinking a lot about the work being done by the Center for Wise Practice out of Toronto, which is sort of reframing Indigenous stigmas within healthcare, and Adageway, which has been helping Indigenous people access vaccines, especially urban populations. And I think just to like take it out of that, follow me on socials. I'll put a bunch of organizations to follow, but the Indigenous Music Summit, talking about bringing it out of these frameworks and talking about the arts. The Indigenous Music Summit is allowing Indigenous storytellers to tell their own stories in a really interesting decolonized perspective this year. And so I would follow them, and these musicians are telling their own stories in really unique ways and reclaiming how we even experience Indigenous music. So that's exciting. But yeah, so many amazing work, so much amazing work going on. So miigwech.
Thank you for the shout outs and the follows. Now we've reached the end of our Q&A session. So I'd like to thank our audience for all of your questions and our talkers. Thank you, Brianna, Xavier Carter, Sandra Corbet, Ronald Neeson, and Serene Fox. Now, if you enjoyed today's event, we have more coming up on Wednesday, May 26th. TD Bank Group presents The Walrus Talks at Home, Resilience. And then on Tuesday, June 8th, we are partnering again with Facebook Canada to present The Walrus Talks at Home, The Future of Speech Online. Be sure to check in at thewalrus.ca/events. You can browse our schedule. You can register for these upcoming events. We also post videos from all of our events. So come back and check out the Walrus Talks video room. Also, keep an eye on your inbox. We're going to send you an email, and the best way to stay up to date and not miss anything from the Walrus is to subscribe to our newsletter. We need you to opt into that. At the Walrus, we really believe that trustworthy journalism is an essential service. And with your support, we can continue to provide fact-check, long-form journalism that Canadians can rely on. So if you enjoyed this free event tonight, go to our website, thewalrus.ca, click on donate. All gifts of $20 or more will receive a charitable tax receipt. Thank you to the team at Facebook, Kevin, Mark, Rachel, Aaron, Megan, and Tammy for making tonight's conversation possible. Thank you to our annual sponsors, Inspire Labatt Breweries of Canada, Air Canada and Shaw, and we're excited to have Facebook Canada joining that group. Community is really important in these COVID times, and you are all a part of the Walrus. Thank you so much for tuning in. Merci, miigwech. Have a great evening.